Welcome to our video series called Industry Viewpoints, brought to you by the American Bankruptcy Institute. Each segment will feature an expert providing views on the current state of a particular industry with a focus on what may lie ahead. My guest on this edition is James Patrick Shea, a founding partner of Shea Larsen in Las Vegas. Mr. Shea is a former president of ABI and is one of our most prolific lecturers and writers. Today, we will be talking with Mr. Shea about the current conditions in the hospitality industry and its future. As you can imagine, living in Las Vegas, like Mr. Shea does, makes hospitality and entertainment an important part of his law practice. You won't be surprised to hear that he has recently written on and lectured about, among other things, representing bankrupt celebrities and restructuring golf courses. That having been said, Jim, let's focus on where we are today, because I remember at an ABI event not too long ago, or at least it was more than a year ago, that's for sure, you told me that your home is on the Las Vegas Strip. So tell me, Jim, what did it look like a year ago when the world came to a halt?
Well, thank you, Bill. First of all, thanks for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller. The house, actually, I don't live on the Strip. I have a view of the Strip from my home. And one of the things that we did talk about was the fact that normally, when I look out, I get to see the lights of the various casinos and businesses from downtown Las Vegas all the way down the Strip out to the far end. And almost overnight, the Strip went dark. There were still a few lights left on for security purposes. It was odd, but it wasn't startling. And this is obviously post-pandemic, when the city came to a grinding halt. We drove downtown, and the downtown Las Vegas casino area was like walking onto a movie set. There were no people except for the police, and then a couple of other curious folks such as myself that had driven down there. But about half of the casinos still had some lights on, some were completely dark, but it was completely void of people, which in my 40 plus years of coming to Las Vegas and living in Las Vegas, that was the first time I'd ever seen it that abandoned.
I'm curious, did the government shut down the casinos with them kicking and screaming, wanting to remain operating?
Well, actually,
how did it occur?
What happened was that the casinos closed down before the governor in Nevada closed the casinos down. And I think that is very forward thinking of the casinos for a number of reasons. And you certainly, without being in the room, I can't tell you what exactly each of the casinos or their management teams were thinking, but I like to think that there was, a good measure of humanitarianism behind it, because, this is before we started talking about super spreader events as just an everyday term. They realized that in Las Vegas, you don't end up with a few people coming here. We have 150,000 hotel rooms here. And so when you bring enough people to fill to the average occupancy of 95%, 150,000 rooms, you're talking about a few 100,000 people being here. So when you bring them all together for an event such as Super Bowl or one of the conferences, whether it is one of the car shows or one of the CES or something else, you're bringing a bunch of people into one space that will then go home or at least somewhere else, and that isn't going to be confined to Las Vegas. So I think they realize that. And, you know, this isn't the first rodeo, if you will, for Nevada in dealing with post-traumatic activities that have occurred here. I don't want to say that we're used to dealing with trouble, but I will say that I think that the casinos and the government, at least in Nevada, have worked very well together in trying to formulate a response to the situation that we've been dealing with.
You know, Jim, this is not the first time that Las Vegas has had its future declared to be dead. And you've also had a number of catastrophic events in the past that have severely damaged the industries in Las Vegas.
We've been declared dead prematurely quite a few times. You know, early in my practice, we ended up with what were anticipated to be these apocalyptic events with regards to Las Vegas in particular. You ended up with Atlantic City opening as a hub that was going to compete with Las Vegas for tourism and for gaming. That didn't really seem to it didn't seem to pan out the way people predicted. You know, we ended up in the early 80s. There was the MGM hotel fire. There was the Hilton hotel fire. We had a stint of Legionnaire's disease that unfortunately also affected travel to Las Vegas. We ended up with the recession where that affected people's travel plans coming to Las Vegas. We had, unfortunately, the shooting here in Las Vegas, which has the unfortunate distinction of being the largest mass shooting in the United States. We've had a number of different, after 9/11, we had a big downturn in business here as well. In each one of those, some of those were national problems. Some of those obviously were Las Vegas centric, if you will, but each of those required a response. And I would say to you that whether it was learning from those experiences or just the next step in line, one of the things I think that we here in Las Vegas did was followed emergency protocol 101, which is containment and remediation. So first you contain the problem. It's as if, if you have a pipe break in your house, you turn off the water to stop the expanding flood, then you fix the pipe. What they did here was they tried to contain the issue and then remediate it. And the remediation, of course, came in, I think, a number of different waves. One is to remediate it by putting in place just social distancing, putting up barriers, doing things so that we could attempt to have some normalcy while still realizing that things weren't normal.
I see. Listen, Jim, as of right now, to what extent are the casinos operating?
So after this last week, casinos are up to 50% occupancy. And so that kind of coincided with the return of, I shouldn't say return, it was a increase in leisure travel to Las Vegas that coincided with March Madness. As you know, the NCAA basketball tournament, referred to as March Madness, it's one of the busiest times of the year here in Las Vegas. And what we saw was an increase in both room occupancy and room revenue rate, which has stayed at those levels. And I think that the industry is hoping that that's a signal that demand is going to continue, and therefore, a indication that the market is recovering.
Jim, are the big fancy shows in Las Vegas going now, or are they still dark?
What do you want tickets to, Bill? So, they have not been, but they are announcing those, and that is going to be, I think that is being taken as a sign, if you will, that we're looking forward to normalcy returning to Las Vegas.
Well,
So, I mean, because otherwise, I mean, it's very difficult to try to get those venues filled, staffed, especially if they're going to continue at a loss. So they really haven't been, but they're being announced now. Concerts are being announced now, and that is probably as things continue to change in Las Vegas, the concert scene is probably a bigger indication than the show scene, bigger draw anyway.
a year ago, people like me figured that Las Vegas would be particularly vulnerable to injury from the virus shutdown. And so, I would have thought a year ago that we would have had a number of major, huge bankruptcies in Las Vegas. Has that transpired?
No, it hasn't. One of the things that I again will say is, and part of it shouldn't be a surprise, right? I mean, this gaming in Nevada in 2019 was a $12 billion industry. This isn't, the same industry that, gaming this year, legalized gaming is celebrating its 90th anniversary this year in Nevada. Las Vegas is a city that was named nearly 200 years ago. Things continue to progress. Things continue to change. It is a very sophisticated, very competitive industry. And I think that one of the things that you will see when this all plays out, if you will, and you go back and take a look at the history, we were, as an industry and as a city, very nimble as far as responding to the crisis. So, for instance, one of the things we talked about before is RevPAR. It's the revenue. It's a back of the envelope type metric that's used to test gaming properties. It's fairly simplistic, but basically it's your daily room rate, your average daily room rate multiplied by your hotel occupancy. So, for instance, if you have a room that generates on average $100 a night and you're 90% occupied, it's a 90. So what you take that and then you measure past performance and future performance against that, and it's just kind of a back of the envelope. Nevada, we dropped on that part of it, we dropped about 65%. But if you look at Hawaii dropped 95%. And the difference was because while we were still dealing with the limitations imposed by COVID in dealing with it, we were able to bring in people from out of state. So when airports were shut down, there was a bigger effort to bring in tourists from California, Arizona, Utah. That resulted in a lower per room rate, but it also ended up with a much higher occupancy than somewhere like Hawaii, where people just couldn't go. I mean, it was much easier to drive to Nevada than it is to Hawaii.
Well, Jim, I tell you, this is absolutely fascinating. You have given us a great deal of interesting and in some cases very surprising information. And I thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Bill. I'm happy to come back and maybe in a few months we'll come back and see if any of my predictions were actually true.
Well, that's a very good point, because we do look forward to having you back and seeing how the hospitality industry in Las Vegas fares in the next couple of years. And of course, hospitality will be the fodder for upcoming ABI events and publications. To find out, have a look at abi.org for the latest updates. We thank you for turning in. In the Industry Viewpoints series in upcoming days and weeks, we will talk with other experts about the future of industries that have been affected by our turbulent economic times. Until then, be well, stay safe. We'll see you again soon. Good day.